Hello, and a very warm welcome to this webinar brought to you by Rockwell Automation and Mining Review Africa. And today we are discussing the connected mine and the role it plays in accelerating technology adoption for sustainable mining. My name is Gerard Peter. I'm the Senior Editor of Mining Review Africa, and I will be your moderator for this live webinar. Now, the world is seeing incredible changes that require resource-intensive goods of all sorts. Overall, the population is growing and shifting to urban areas. The middle class is expanding, infrastructure development is increasing, and with this growth comes a need for resources. Metals such as iron, copper, aluminum, and nickel will be in much higher demand. In addition, the quest for a less carbon-intensive future has spurred growth in electric vehicles, and lithium, magnesium, cobalt, and other minerals used in battery production are in greater demand. Likewise, bigger and better energy storage batteries are flooding the marketplace to support wind, solar, and other sources of power. Our world is changing before our eyes, and these changes must be met through the support of mining. When you collect, aggregate, and analyze data across operations, you can spot trends and interdependencies that are missed when data lives in silos. With this type of information, you can make more informed decisions. Further, data-driven process solutions benefit application areas of a mine, including comminution, concentration, materials handling, and mine electrification. And this is where Rockwell's Automation's connected mine comes in. It can turn data into business decisions by leveraging the latest enabling and digital technologies. So how can the connected mine benefit your operation? Well, to unpack this topic, I am joined by an esteemed panel of guests. I would like to introduce Canninah Dladla, Country Sales Director for Africa of Rockwell Automation, and Francois du Toit, Information Solutions Sales Executive at Rockwell Automation. Thank you both for joining us today. Now, just a note to you, the audience, that you too can be part of the discussion by simply sending your questions for our panelists. Just pop your questions into the chat box and one of our panelists will answer it. And please remember to include your name and where you are from. Now, as part of your interaction with us, I would like you to first take part in our poll, which is coming up on screen right now. The question is, what in your view is the biggest challenge facing mining companies? Is it market volatility, access to resources, capital and operational cost, attracting and retaining skills, decarbonization, or other? I'll repeat the question. What in your view is the biggest challenge facing mining companies? Is it market volatility, access to resources, capital and operational cost, attracting and retaining skills, decarbonization, or other? I will give you a few seconds to make your choice, and the results of the poll will be announced at the end of this webinar. Right. Now, to kick off our discussion, Canninah will be sharing with us a short presentation. Thank you, Canninah. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Gerard. Good morning, everybody. As Gerard said earlier on, my name is Canninah Dladla. I am the MD for Rockwell Automation in South Africa and the Country Sales Director for Rockwell in Africa. Today, we are talking about connected mine. But most importantly, we can't talk about connected mine without digital transformation and digital adaptation. So what is the value of digital transformation? If we look into the slide that we have now, it shows big numbers, beautiful numbers that look very attractive. However, these numbers are coming from a study or a survey that was conducted by MESA a few years ago. So this was based on the manufacturers that adopted digital technology a few years ago, 10, 12 years ago. So this is what they've experienced lately. So you will see that it's showing that almost 9% of financials that they're enjoying already in their companies. But what spoke to my heart importantly was inventory. We all know the headache that everybody has with inventory on their balance sheet. So imagine if by adopting digital transformation, you can see a change of almost 15%. I know a lot of you will understand where I'm coming from because it's a real headache for most people. We're also talking about almost 17% of efficiency. But as I was digging more into these numbers, I also saw that there's also almost 20% of improvement, average improvement annually when it comes to their compliance. We all know how important compliance is. So if you can see a change of average of 20% on your compliance, it makes a huge difference for most manufacturers. Going into the second slide. Technology can't fail me now. Okay. Looks like I've typed. I pressed a couple of more times. Okay. Should be okay now. So we at Rockwell, we are saying for the mines, our customers, we're talking about connected mines. So it is time to accelerate the technology adoption in mining. We are seeing a lot of mining customers talking about we want to accelerate. But what does it mean? If you look on the slides, you see that we're talking about a few industries that have adopted technology acceleration a couple of years ago already, which we were talking about earlier on when we said they've enjoyed almost 20% on their compliance and 15% on their inventory. Most mines are talking about cost optimization and productivity gains. However, if you look at some of the issues that we're facing in mining lately, we're talking about connected workers. Everybody talks about the worker as the most important asset. I will say one of the benefits of accelerating technology adoption in mining will be making sure that you've got that connected worker and making sure that safety, which everybody's talking about, the zero harm in terms of their resources, the most important resources, which is their employees. So by doing that, we can be able to achieve that, one. Secondly, the speed of decision making. You've got data in hand. That means the speed of your decision making will be faster and more reliable. We all want to be agile. I know every mine wants to be agile and more competitive. In a nutshell, if you look at what they can do in a speed of time, by adopting digital transformation and accelerating it quickly, as fast as possible, that means you can be able to have your workers connected, you can be very much agile, you can make decisions daily, not just monthly, but you can also connect with your fellow employees, your fellow colleagues, where you can be able to make decisions quite fast based on the data in hand. Based on that, I will hand over to Francois, who's going to go more into details in terms of what we offer as Rockwell Automation.
Thank you, Canninah.
So much.
Okay, I think it's quite important just to tie in with what Canninah was saying, right? And if you look at the latest report that Ernst & Young came out in terms of sort of top business risk and opportunities for mining and metals companies for the coming year, what is quite interesting about this specific one is that digital and innovation, yes, it has dropped down in terms of priority from the previous year, but I think that is to a large extent because mining has made some significant inroads in terms of digital. I think, and we'll get to that in a second right now, but I do think if you look at what mining companies are doing, it's still happening to a large extent in isolation. What is important though is, and why we've sort of highlighted a number of these aspects, and this is what we're going to I'm going to take you through the rest of the sort of webinar, is around how digital and connected and the connected mine helps mining companies with their ESG goals, right? From cost and productivity, supply chain disruption. Canninah touched on the workforce in terms of the connected worker, which we'll get to as well. But at the same time, that's all driven by digital innovation, right? And if we can't help, we can't support our customers in terms of expanding digital's role in terms of ESG. And when we look at ESG, we look at the entire supply chain of the mine, right? So from pit to port, and where there's any sort of opportunity to increase or decrease decarbonization, decrease electricity usage, water usage, those kind of things. And then we get to cost and productivity, which is kind of speaks for itself in terms of, we'll get to that in terms of understanding how we can impact not just the cost of mining, but at the same time increase the throughput of those mines, right? While they are dealing with the fact that they are they're not getting access to the high grade ore that they used to. Mining conditions are a little bit more difficult. It's more remote, etc., etc. And then, like Canninah was saying, we'll touch on the workforce and how we take all of that information and data that we now are gathering about the connected mine and put that back into the hands of the decision maker, right? Whether it's the operator, whether it's the management team, in terms of helping them make better decisions, right? Sorry, that's one too many. So what we've done at Rockwell is we sort of had a discussion over the last couple of years with our mining customers, right? And we sort of asked them, so what are the biggest challenges that they're facing? And that's the reason for the poll. And a lot of them said it's around market volatility, around the price index, and how the rest of the economy has a run-on effect of commodity prices. The next bit was around the access to resources, like I said. I mean, 30% copper grade decline over the last 2 decades, right? So it's a case of we need to be able to be smart in terms of how we mine that lower grade copper to still give us the same return on investment, right? The capital operational cost, right, has gone up significantly, and has a lot to do with not just the cost of labor, etc., but also a case of getting to those remote operations, getting the operation built itself, getting the equipment to the operation, those kind of aspects all has a great impact on the cost of the operation itself, right? And then we need to understand how can we then help you optimize those assets and that operational cost, right? The next bit Canninah sort of talked about, and that's where the connected worker comes in, and I love the fact that she's so passionate about it. It's how do we help mining companies attract and retain skills, right? And I think, I mean, having spoken to mining companies over the last 15 years, and the newer sort of engineering staff, mining technical people coming into the industry, they are a lot more technologically savvy, and they're looking to work for mining companies that invest in technology to help them make their jobs easier, right? They can see the benefit. And then lastly, but I think the sort of more important one is around decarbonization, and all of these sort of thread through to the role of ESG within the mining industry, and specifically decarbonization, because we can't look at decarbonization as a single event, right? It's just on fuel consumption or electricity usage, but we need to look at it from a complete supply chain perspective, right? And how can we add value to each step in that supply chain, right? So what we did then is, after having that discussion, we sort of looked at and said, listen, okay, well, what are the strategic focus areas that we as Rockwell should be focusing on if we want to support customers in this, right? And number one, in terms of market volatility, was around providing mining companies with an integrated view, right? And I'll get you some of that details now. The same point around access to resources. How do we give you the ability to process the lower grade lower grade ores, but at a cost-effective way, right? And the second one is around maintaining the implementation of effective operating and maintenance strategies around those high-value assets that we're using within the mining industry. And then leveraging technology to make the workplace more attractive and safer, like Canninah was saying. And ultimately, we want to lead into sustainable operations. And that we do through automation and digitization, electrification, and looking at how we can support the mining companies with renewables. I'm going to skip, we did this. So let me just go up one. Sorry. So if we break down those strategic sort of focus areas down, and we want to look at business outcomes, how do we support the various sections when it comes to market volatility and those challenges that we see the mining companies are facing, with real world solutions that deliver business outcomes to mining companies. The first one we're going to step into is around, if we look at the volatility of the market and we want to reduce that or assist mining companies in managing that better, right? We want to give them the ability to do that, what we call mine-to-market optimization. And it's around reducing the uncertainty, the risk, as well at the same time improving operational performance. And for that, we've focused our solutions around making sure that we've got an industrial IoT-based platform, right? And that is important for us because that becomes the nodal point of all data exchange and of all data information, right? And analysis that happens within a mining company. And it also forms the basis of how we make that information available to decision makers. But at the same time, as I said, right, the mining companies is quite a big ecosystem, and we need to be able to help them plan and manage the entire supply chain that they work with every single day, not just from the pit to the plant, but ultimately to their end customer. Okay, so sorry guys, this thing is skipping a bit. Okay, there we go. So the first aspect we're going to look at is the IoT, our sort of mind. A bit slow. Okay, yeah. So the first aspect we're going to be focusing around is what we call industrial IoT-based mining operations management. Right? And the idea for us when we develop this and what we're pushing into the market right now is the fact that we want to provide mining companies with an out-of-the-box, right, configurable solution that helps them manage the operation itself. Right? And this is from pit to port, providing them with that detailed functionality around managing their downtime and loss accounting, being able to have complete control over the inventory and storage balances, whether it's sitting at the site, the mine site itself, sitting at the stockyard at the port, or at the rail loadout station. Right? Is understanding that entire value chain for the actual material that they are mining. Right? Providing them tools around statistical process control, short interval control, which provides them that in-shift benefits, right? And ultimately giving them that production and performance reporting that the decision makers need in order to optimize the operation itself. Supported by metals reporting, where we're looking at the constituent values of the ore that they are mining. And then the very important one that we've certainly seen over the last couple of years is around asset utilization and OEE. It's how do we help mining companies get the most out of that high capital cost assets that they've invested in. But more importantly is using our industrial data ops platform, which I'll discuss a little bit later, is how do we bring all of that information together for a mining company. Next bit around that, handling that market volatility is how do we help them simulate and run those what-if scenarios when it comes to their supply chain simulation. And that's not just supply chain in terms of downstream supply chain or upstream supply chain where they're getting supplies from OEMs, et cetera, It's more a case of how do we help them manage a supply chain in terms of their product. Right? So that is simulating getting the ore out of the ground, right, to the run-of-mine stockpile, to the primary crusher, through the plant, ultimately to a product stockpile and at the end to the customer. And there we provide very specific tools where we can take that market sort of volatility into account. So we look at the commodity price, we can look at the cost of transportation, we can look at those various transportation options, we can optimize the amount of haul trucks that are being used and run and give them the ability to simulate that process and ultimately optimize that. Right? And that just for us, it's about helping them drive down costs. The next bit around what we do is, and this is around that access to resources, and it becomes extremely important when we start looking at the operational technology layer or the automation layer for us, is how do we assist customers, right, in reducing the variability, right, while increasing the throughput at the same time also helping them manage their energy, water consumption, as well as emissions, right? And that we have to do at the controller level. And that's quite important for us, for our customers, that we tell them is we start at the controller level. But at the same time, we also need to be able to extrapolate that data into the cloud, where we can use technology like data centers to do the analysis of that data in order to show us those trends or aspects that are contributing the most to the variability or the energy and water consumption. Right? So we start at the edge to cloud process optimization. And what that means is we actually start at the controller layer. Right? And that's extremely important for us, is to be able to say, we need to build a analysis layer on top of the controllers that are controlling our plants at mining companies, that actually analyze that data in real time, show us the variability in our processing that might have an impact on our rate of recovery or our yield, and at the same time being able to then create a gateway of taking that contextualized data up into the cloud for analysis, depending on the business outcome or what we're trying to solve for, but being able to do that in a secure manner, right? And that's where we provide very specific tool sets, right, around modeling that entire automation layer, right? And at the same time, then being able to simulate and show the customer what is the best outcome, or what is the best process that'll lead to the outcome that they're looking for. But at the same time, then being able to monitor that process to see if it complies to that specific outcome or specific settings that we've modeled, right, as part of modeling predictive control. We also need to be able to provide not just the OEM, but the EPCs, the people responsible for actually designing and building those mining facilities with those advanced engineering tools, so they can actually do process and machine digital twins, right? So understanding and designing a process, as well as the actual asset itself, the stack of the reclaimers, how we want to position them, how are they going to be moving across the operation. We want to be able to simulate that, right? So that before you actually start building, or whether it's an expansion or a new operation, you can run those scenarios. You can look at what is the best way and optimal way of planning the mine itself, right? Before we actually get into commissioning. The next one, and it's actually quite close to my heart, because I've been speaking to mining companies over the last couple of years intensely about this, right? Is how do we then take those existing operations, right, and help them make those assets more reliable and more efficient, right? By reducing the maintenance costs and help prevent those equipment failures. Most mining companies will understand that the biggest impact on production is unplanned downtime, and it's also one of the biggest cost factors, not just from a maintenance and parts perspective, but from a loss of production perspective. If we're running a mining operation at capacity, and we've lost production 8 hours on the previous shift, we can't make it up the next day, right? Because all we can do the next day is run at capacity. So for us, it's how do we help our customers, right, reduce that unplanned downtime, ensuring that the equipment uptime is maximum, the throughput of the actual asset is at its maximum, right? But when we do need to do maintenance, then is how do we help them do the maintenance in the best possible way, right? By reducing sort of the mean time to repair and the first time fix rates, right? Increasing first time fix rate. So from a cloud-based asset performance management solution, what we've looked at, and the reason why we've taken the route of building a cloud offering on this, right, is that it allows us then to actually use the benefits of the cloud in terms of computing power to do the analysis of the assets and actually be able to understand the condition of the asset as it is being used, right? What we've done in this specific section as well is we've not just looked at a company or a mining company's assets, we've looked at specific asset types, right? So whether it's a ball mill, whether it's a conveyor, whether it's a pump, right? And we've taken the historical data that we've gathered across multiple customers around why typically do these assets fail, right? We build that into our machine learning algorithms that then now actually through our data ops platform connect to those assets, monitor those specific tags, sensors that are required for the machine learning algorithm to be able to predict a failure. So imagine that we can ultimately, the goal for us then is to be able to tell you as a mining company on those specific assets that you are looking at a failure of this asset in 2 weeks time, 3 weeks time, whatever the parameters that we've set up for it, right? Which then allows you to go and plan and schedule maintenance instead of run to failure, where you've got an unplanned downtime. And again, for us, it's around optimizing the asset and making the asset as available as possible. The next bit is if we're managing the asset correctly, right, and we understand what the condition of the asset actually is, right, and we can have those pre-warnings around a potential asset failure, right. We also want to be able to streamline then how the maintenance task is being done, right? So we're leveraging again our cloud-based solution that has embedded artificial intelligence that not only takes that condition-based monitoring information of the asset itself to go and plan the schedule of when maintenance should happen, right? And taking that, and we also taking into consideration the production schedule that we might have. So we can actually now understand that an asset will fail in 2 weeks' time, but we do have a planned downtime on a specific section of the plant scheduled for this weekend, so we might as well do this maintenance as well. So it's using artificial intelligence to go and build a smart maintenance schedule, right, based on the actual maintenance force that we've got, the parts on hand that we have, and the job cards that are currently in the queue, right? But more importantly for us, and getting back to sort of the aspect of the connected worker, right, is the focus for us around this specific solution is putting the power in the hands of the actual maintenance technician, making their lives as simple as possible by using mobile technology, whether it's a tablet, a phone, and then being able to not just disseminate their work orders to them, but all the information that they need to complete the work order, whether that is instructions, whether it's videos around how to do the maintenance task. It's a complete part list, being able to scan those part lists, ensuring they've got the correct parts on hand with them, but all in the palm of their hand. Right? And for us, the sort of key performance indicator for us is looking at that mean time to repair, lowering the mean time to repair, ensuring the mean time between failures, right, is extended, because we want to make sure that the actual maintenance task is performed right the first time with the correct parts, right, to ensure those assets are as available as possible. The next one, Canninah touched on it, was for us around the connected work. And this is again around how do we use technology to make the workplace more attractive and safer. And I think mining and safety is a big issue. But at the same time, we also want to make the worker what I would call a smart connected worker. Right? So it's helping them by giving them access to the right information at the right time in whatever way or form they need it, to be able to do their jobs better and safer. So what we've looked at from that perspective is what we call our unified mobile platform for field workers, and these can be operators, maintenance technicians, all of that. But it's leveraging technology like augmented reality to be able to not just overlay information about the asset that they're looking at. If there's any planning information required, is there any maintenance tasks required? What is actually going on with the asset itself, right? In real time. Through multiple platforms, right? But it's giving them that sort of almost gaming technology in the palm of their hand, but for a real world scenario where we're actually overlaying all of that operational data that we've got onto an asset, onto a process for them to be able to visualize that. At the same time, it's also a case of we can use this information now, or the same technology, to go and capture some of that expert technology that sits within any kind of mining organization. There's usually 1 or 2 people that has been at the operation for some time. They know exactly how to do a maintenance task or how to work on a specific asset. How do we capture that information, right? So that it not only becomes part of the organization itself, but we can reuse it in a sort of a gamification type scenario to train new people, right? And whether it's in a training center or whether they're actually on the job and they've got access to that expert guiding them through the steps, whether it's through a video or whether it's through an actual online call, but it gives them the expert almost in the palm of their hand wherever they are within the operation. But all of this, and I think this is where we sort of all of this comes together, and a lot of the mining companies we're dealing with at the moment are looking at investing in some sort of remote operating center or integrated remote operating center. There's various terms for it out there. But what we've seen is none of that is really possible, especially when we can create a remote operating center. We can put screens in there, we can replicate the SCADA screens that we have on the plant in that operating center, etc., etc. We can have access to the fleet management system. But ultimately, if we want to have operational data sitting within a remote operating center, we need to have what we call our industrial data ops platform. And the reason for that is there's a lot of information in mining, and there's a reason why mining companies are currently using anywhere between 1% and 5% of the actual data that is available within the operation. And that is because it lacks context. Right? One of the big things that I've certainly seen and we've dealt with in the last bit is around helping mining companies create context for the data. Right? So a data tag that gives you a temperature reading, and the temperature reading is 50 degrees. Right? Unless there's a specification that says there's a problem. If it's 50 degrees, that means it's too high, or there's an expert that tells you there's a problem. All we know is the reading is 50 degrees. So we need to be able to provide context to that reading and understanding a reading of 50 degrees Celsius is high, which means that the asset itself or the process itself is not running as efficiently or as it's supposed to be running. And that's where the data ops platform comes in, is it helping us build all of those integrations down into whether it's historians, the PLC, the industrial IoT platform, our mining execution systems, whatever they might be, including our enterprise resource systems or our enterprise layer. It's still a case of we need to be able to onboard all of that data, provide the context for it, so that we can ultimately then do a data discovery and exploration where we understand what is the correlation between various data points, right? And then being able to chart and visualize and analyze that. So run those scenarios of if this happens, then what is the effect on that, right? Or understand the correlation between heat and pressure, right, on a specific asset that might indicate a failure, right? Or understand that this specific chemical that we've added too much of in our beneficiation process has had the following impact on our rate of recovery. Right? But we still need to be able to have that data layer that does the integration, does the cleaning of the data, contextualizing of the data, because ultimately, if that's the data we're going to be using, right, to do our decision making, we need to know that that data is clean, contextualized, and correct. And that forms the basis of any sort of integrated remote operating center, right? Is having that thread, or what we call the digital thread, from the actual asset itself, the sensor, the PLC, the tag, right through into the enterprise, because that's where we actually can create the value there. And then all of this, I think, sort of ties back to what we said at the beginning around decarbonization and sustainable operations. And if you think about what I've said to now is, yes, there's specific areas around market volatility. There were specific solutions around process optimization, but all of that we do with our customers with sort of ESG or sustainability or decarbonization in mind. Because the only way we can actually effectively help a mining company reach those goals is, like I said, we have to optimize every single step of the process, right? And see where we can save on energy, on water, on reducing carbon footprint, but it's each and every single stage. And I think a lot of mining companies have been looking at this from an isolation point. They typically look at the plant, which has got the highest power usage, et cetera, to try and optimize and reach their goals there. Our view on that is if we've got that data platform, that connected mine sort of concept, we can actually look at how we can make the operation sustainable across the entire value chain. But for us, it starts with, being Rockwell, it starts for us at the bottom, at the controller level. Right? So it's understanding that if we can control the drives, right? If we can control, we've got energy meters and we've got controllers, smart controllers in there, where we can actually either lower the speed, increase the speed, depending on what the plan is, depending on what we are mining, or in that case, beneficiating at the plant at that point in time, right? We need to be able to control that bottom layer. That needs to be something that is variable. So it needs to be something that we can change based on the conditions of the asset, based on the conditions or the plan in terms of what we're trying to produce. And at the same time, having those sort of sustainability goals in mind. Right? So, but all of that whether it's water, air, gas, electricity, steam that is being consumed within the mining industry, right, needs to flow up into sort of what we call a real-time energy management solution, right? And it's a holistic view of all of those aspects: water usage, chemical usage, air, gas, electricity, across the entire mining value chain, right? Because that gives us then the ability to actually show what the impact of each area is in terms of the ESG goals that the company might have, and show at the same time being able to analyze that to show where the biggest investment the mining company should make in terms of improving certain aspects, right? Like I said, whether it's electricity usage, looking at renewables for certain aspects within their environment, water usage and wastewater treatment, how are we doing that? How much water are we using? How effectively are we treating the water that we are using that we might be pushing back into the environment, right? But for us, all of that then flows up into that industrial IoT platform that underpins the entire Rockwell sort of connected mine solution, where we're allowed to do, we can actually effectively do the energy monitoring in real time, looking at our emissions monitoring, benchmark that against our performance KPIs as an organization, right? Understand what the data correlation is between a specific asset using X amount of electricity, watts of electricity, versus another asset doing the same task but with less, right? So we need to be able to do that data correlation, understand what has an impact on upstream and downstream on our usage of water, air, gas, electricity, and steam, right? And ultimately, the basics around reporting and doing advanced analytics on how can we improve this. But so our view, right, then around digital transformation, and we see it obviously, and I think most companies understand that this is a journey, right? It starts, and it has to start with a very pragmatic strategy, right? And that's where we help mining companies at the moment, is starting off with that operational assessment, and what we call a digital maturity index, where we actually go to a mining company, we will help them and look at what their existing infrastructure, understand what is the as is, right? Then understand ultimately in terms of your corporate alignment from a sustainability perspective, what are those KPIs that we need to be working towards, right? And then based on the operational assessment or your as is, we can then help build the business case of where you need to go, right? In order to reach those corporate goals that you've set for yourselves, right? And then ultimately build the business architecture, because there will be process changes within the company itself that need to support that, right down to the technical architecture that then leads us into a digital roadmap of what is step one, what is step two, to reach that sustainability goals, right, within a mining company as part of digital transformation. What we've certainly seen, I think the big challenge is a lot of mining companies sort of get stuck in because they focus on one aspect and then they get stuck in pilot purgatory, where they run a pilot that doesn't really show the benefits. They haven't quite outlined what the benefits is they're looking for or trying to solve, right? And then it's almost impossible then to justify the business case of making the investment. So I think it's very important to have a very sort of pragmatic strategy around this, starting with understanding where you are right now, and then building the roadmap in terms of where you want to go. Then from a Rockwell perspective, obviously for us, right, this is what we do. As the largest automation company in the world, and with our very big focus the last couple of years around digital, and proven ways in terms of how we've helped customers reach their sort of digital transformation goals, it is important to choose the right partner. Whether it's Rockwell or whether it's someone else, it's understanding, again, we're looking at automating the automated control. So that's starting at the basic of the controller itself. How do we automate as much of that process as we can, because then we can control it better. Then we look at if we've automated that, right, and we've got all the controllers in place, we've got the drives in place, most of our processing plant is run through automated control. We can now gather that data, right, use advanced process control to see how we can optimize the actual process, right? Right through to understanding we can do a vertical integration for the entire plant, right? That's getting access to everything and understanding what is going on plant-wide, and not just looking at specific sections of the plant itself, right? And then taking all of that information and pushing it into sort of your integrated remote operating centers, right? And we've got some great examples from a customer case studies around how we've saved customers money by using some of those remote operating centers and combining them into one sort of integrated remote operating center and centralizing some of that decision making. But ultimately, in terms of sustainability and the whole process or the concept of the connected mine is looking at the entire value chain optimization. Right? Is again, I spoke about it earlier, is the pit to port sort of concept, right? And almost actually not just pit to port, almost pit to customer concept of how do we optimize the entire value chain. Right? That is getting the ore out of the ground, beneficiating the ore, and transporting the ore to the end customer. Because all of that has an impact not just on cost, but also ultimately on sustainability of the industry itself. And that is me. Thank you very much. You know.
Thank you, Francois. That was very insightful. And just before we move on, just a reminder to our audience that if you have any questions for Canninah or Francois, please pop them into the chat box and they'll be able to answer it for you. Francois, I want to ask you, because both you and Canninah touched on this digital journey. If you look at the African mining space, where a lot of mines operate in remote areas, there's network issues, etc. Do you feel that a connected mine on this continent can become a reality?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and that's I think where the Rockwell we've sort of taken a focus for us is understanding. Yes, we want to help mining companies move from where they are right now into being able to leverage something like the cloud. Right? But we also understand that there's operational issues, like you said. Mining companies operate in very remote areas. Hence the reason why the way we built the connected mine, right, is it can actually run in isolation on the operation itself. We don't necessarily have to do anything in the cloud if we don't want to, or the mining company can't do it. So we've taken that into account in terms of how we built the architectures of the connected mine solution, is understanding that, yes, sometimes it'll be a very remote operation with no internet connection going out or a very bad internet connection going out. So we've made sure that our solutions sort of cater for that kind of network architecture, if you want to call it that.
Okay. Canninah, if I can just bring you in here, and based on what you've said in your slide presentation, and also taking from what Francois has said, what would you say is the biggest challenge for mining companies when they are trying to establish integrated remote operating centers?
It might sound a little bit simple, but it's not that simple. For me, I would say digital transformation, which means data and your people. Because let's be honest, before you can do anything or achieve anything, you need to have data at hand. And that's exactly what data transformation gives you. And for you to be able to achieve the connected mine that we're talking about, you need to have your employees, which is your people, which are key. Because remember, data without people, you cannot achieve anything. So people also need data. So combination of the two, give the connected mine and the connected worker. Based on that, you can achieve everything else that we're talking about, including optimizing your costs. Anything that you need to optimize in a mine or in any business cannot be achieved without data and people. So I'm very passionate about people and data because for me they work hand in hand. And I don't think it's any different anywhere else. But I think mines can actually achieve that much better by adopting data transformation quite quickly.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Canninah. Francois, you spoke about APM and a cloud-based approach. What is the difference between these two approaches?
So, I mean, the one thing that we've seen, right, is that if we, for instance, do an asset performance management type solution and we do it on premise, right, then we rely heavily on whether the customer has got the correct historical data on the asset itself. If they've kept the historian, right, because we need to be able to correlate past failures, for instance, on an asset with the telemetry of the asset at the point of failure, what was actually done from a maintenance perspective, so we can correlate that to it's a mechanical failure, electrical failure, whatever the case may be. Right, so we can still do it, right? But what we've seen right now is that takes longer because we have to go through this learning process. Right? The difference between that versus the cloud-based solution, because the cloud-based solution already has that data history, right? in understanding how that asset type, for instance, like I said, on a ball mill or a pump, we have got historical data gathered from a whole host of customers on the behavior of that asset that we can now push into that machine learning model and then apply it back to the asset itself, right? So we can do both, right? The one has just got a different process than the other one. The reason why we're doing it as a SaaS offering for our customers that can do that is because our time to value is so much shorter for them.
Okay. Francois, a question that has been directed to you from a member of the audience. I'm just going to read out the question for you. Francois, you have shown that you guys do TMM monitoring and simulation in open pit mines. What edge gateway do you use to get telemetry data out of the vehicle? And where have you done this? So basically asking in which mining operation this has been implemented.
Okay. So again, for us, we've got a number of sort of call it edge gateway sort of technology, and we tend to apply it based on what the requirement is. In this specific case, right, if for instance, we don't use, it's not a Rockwell sort of controller that's sitting on the asset itself, and we're talking telemetry data, so we're probably talking mobile fleet. We would use something like what we call technology we call Kepware, which is an industrial IoT gateway that actually provides us that integration into the actual, whether it's a CAN bus or whatever the sensor might be on the mobile asset, but provides us that industrial integration to the asset itself, right? To be able to get the data out and then through the gateway out wherever it needs to go, right? If it needs to go out, typically we use the gateways if it needs to go to the internet, but we can use that same technology whether it's on premise as well. But it gives us the access, that industrial connectivity to the assets themselves. So yes, we do have technology that is very much focused on Rockwell controllers, right? But we also at the same time have technology in place that gives us that access completely vendor agnostic. So we don't, in that specific case, you might be using a controller from a competitor of ours. It might be, like I said, a CAN bus on a mobile fleet, but we can build that integration through Kepware. Using OPC UA or whether it's MQTT to communicate. We support all of those kind of communication technologies, Sigfox, LoRaWAN, all of those networking technologies are all built into our industrial connectivity layer.
Okay, thank you. Canninah, if I can just bring you into the conversation here, and you just mentioned that you're passionate about people and you spoke about the connected worker. When it comes to the connected worker and what mining companies or mining operators are looking at, what are they prioritizing? Is it safety, or is it enhancing productivity, or is it something else?
So I would say safety, which also can be achieved by having that connected worker, because who is working with information, whether remotely or hands-on? It's the connected worker with information. And the only way to be able to achieve that safety requirement is to make sure that you've got reliable people that are skilled and trained with the right information at hand.
Okay, thank you very much. Francois, your presentation has seemed to be a hit, and we've got a question, I'm not too sure who it's from, but the question is, how do we connect and become a partner with Rockwell?
I think, well, either myself or Canninah can answer that. Simply, I mean, obviously with Rockwell, our business model, right, is based on the fact that we've got various partner structures within the organization, whether it's a systems integrator or what we call a value-added distributor for us, because that helps us gives us that scalability across the continent, right? I mean, so we've got a number of partners across the country. We're always open to looking at new partners. Specifically, we've got a big drive at the moment in terms of looking for companies who want to partner with us on what we call our information solutions journey, which is this whole digital journey. We've got a big drive in looking for those companies who are hungry to partner with us. So, I'm not sure if our contact details will be shared, but whoever it is can reach out to me and we can put them in touch with the right people within our organization.
Okay, thank you. I see there's quite a few questions streaming in, but we are almost nearing the end of the session. So, Francois, I want to pose a question to you, and that's with regards to edge. So why has edge and edge computing, for that matter, become so important? And how does that fit into the strategy of most companies to leverage the cloud as a business intelligence platform?
Okay, so there's two parts to the answer. I mean, from an edge perspective, as the assets that, I mean, with the OEMs that are producing assets for the mining companies, those assets are becoming more and more complex, which means that the data that they produce becomes more and more. Right? So the function of the edge, or what we call edge analytics, right, is to be able to put an analysis tool as close to the asset as possible, because some of those assets are generating per millisecond data that is coming through, and we need to be able to make a decision within that millisecond whether that asset needs to be stopped or not. Right? If there's a wrong reading coming through, then we need to be able to take control of that asset at the asset level. Right? So we've got the tools for that edge computing and edge analysis. But at the same time, we want those tools are there to manage that specific asset, for instance. Right? It's not there to correlate data from that asset to the asset next to it, to the asset next to it that sits within that entire processing. And that's where the cloud bit sort of comes in. And whether we're doing that analysis on premise, or we're doing it, or we're using big data and big computing within the cloud space, right, to analyze that data, to go and build those correlations. We need to be able to track that data out of the actual controller or the asset itself up into the cloud for that kind of analysis. Right? So there's different types of analysis for different purposes. Like I said, the one is about controlling the asset itself and making sure that it's running optimally. And like I said, we need to be able to make that millisecond or sub-second decision on the asset itself, which we won't be able to do in the cloud. This is latency. The latency doesn't allow us to do that. But we need to be able to do that big data analysis on the asset how does the asset perform over the last year? We do that in the cloud. Right?
Okay, thank you very much for that, Francois. Before we move on, I'm afraid that's all the time we have with regards to audience questions. However, all is not lost. All the questions that have been submitted will be passed on to Francois and Canninah, and they will be in contact with you with the answers to those questions. Now, if I could just ask us to bring up the results of the poll. Okay, so the question that we asked at the beginning of this webinar was, what do you feel is the biggest challenge facing mining companies? And from the results of the poll, it seems like capital and operational cost is first, followed by market volatility and access to resources, both with 18%, and attracting and retaining skills at 9%. And interestingly, decarbonization at 0%. So I want to start with you, Francois. What do you make of the results of that poll?
Look, it's not surprising. I mean, if we look at the operational cost portion of it, right? Because I think that's also one of the biggest levers and places where companies like Rockwell can have the biggest impact, right? Because that is optimizing the operation, making sure that our cost per ton is as low as possible, but versus whatever the commodity prices in terms of what we're mining. Right? So it's not surprising, and that's typically our conversations that we're having with customers is around how do we actually optimize the assets, right? And that's just supports that sort of whole thing. What is interesting to me, and I'm kind of wondering if it's an African thing, in terms of not a lot of countries in Africa having put down legislation around decarbonization, that it might not be such a big risk within this sort of market. I find that quite interesting.
Okay, Canninah, looking at retaining skills and or upskilling as well, just quick 2 minutes. What do you make of that?
It's not really surprising. So if you look at operational costs, it still ties back to retaining and upskilling, because if your connected worker is retained, upskilled, that means you can actually be able to work with your cost, and you can be able to optimize. So for me, it's very much linked.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you so much for that, Canninah, and thank you, Francois, as well. And just to our audience, as we wrap up, if you've missed part of this discussion or would like to watch this webinar again, you can do so on demand, which will be made available soon on miningreview.com. I'd like to thank our panelists, Francois du Toit and Canninah Dladla, for your time, for your insights, and it was very informative discussion. And thank you especially to Rockwell Automation for sponsoring this insightful webinar. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and goodbye.